Montana Territory, 1879. A slender woman steps down from a dust-coated stagecoach, her gaze scanning the rugged landscape around what should be a bustling gold town. Eleanor Crawford clutches a letter in one gloved hand and a small portrait in the other as the mountain winds tug at her carefully pinned chestnut hair. She's traveled over 2,000 miles to marry a man she's never met, whose elegant letters had painted a picture of prosperity and promise in the growing settlement of Redemption Creek. Instead of the thriving mining town promised in 18 months of correspondence, she finds a settlement in mourning, half empty and shrouded in secrets, and the man who wrote those beautiful letters, Jacob Garrett, is nowhere to be found. What Eleanor doesn't know yet is that the mine collapse that rocked Redemption Creek 3 weeks ago wasn't an accident. And as she begins to unravel the mystery of her missing fiancé, she'll find herself caught in a dangerous web of greed, betrayal, and vengeance that will test not only her refined Eastern upbringing, but her very will to survive. With unexpected allies, including the brooding, scarred U.S. Marshal, who seems to know more about Jacob than he admits, Eleanor will discover strengths she never knew she possessed. Before she can reclaim what rightfully belongs to her, she must first uncover the truth buried deeper than the gold, hidden in Montana's unforgiving mountains. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The journey from Boston to Redemption Creek had been grueling. 3 weeks of increasingly primitive transport, first by train, then by riverboat, and finally 2 days aboard a rattling stagecoach that seemed determined to test the limits of human endurance. Eleanor Crawford had traveled with little company, beyond her own thoughts and the bundle of letters from Jacob Garrett that she'd read so many times she could recite passages from memory. Her buttercup yellow traveling dress, once the pride of her modest wardrobe, was now creased and dust-stained, despite her best efforts. The matching hat, adorned with a single silk flower, had long since been packed away to preserve what little remained of its original shape. Her practical brown boots were scuffed beyond recognition. None of this would have mattered if Jacob had been waiting as promised. "Redemption Creek," the driver called down, his voice reflecting none of the promise the name suggested. "End of the line, ma'am." Eleanor gathered her reticule and adjusted her spectacles before peering through the window. What greeted her was a far cry from the thriving center of commerce and culture that Jacob had described in his letters. The main street showed signs of recent prosperity. Solid wooden buildings with actual glass windows, a 2-story hotel, even a small church with a proper steeple. But there was an undeniable pall hanging over everything. Some businesses were shuttered, and the few people visible moved with the heavy gait of those carrying an invisible burden. "There must be some mistake," she murmured, more to herself than anyone else. The driver, a grizzled man named Hank, who'd barely spoken 10 words since they'd left the last outpost, jumped down and began unloading her trunk. "No mistake, ma'am. This is Redemption Creek, such as it is these days." He spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dirt. "Where you headed exactly?" Eleanor stepped carefully onto the hard-packed earth, grateful that at least it wasn't muddy. Her legs trembled slightly after so many hours confined to the coach. "I'm to meet Mr. Jacob Garrett. He owns the Midas Touch Mine." Hank's weathered face went still. Jacob Garrett. A cold feeling settled in Eleanor's stomach. At 27, with intelligent hazel eyes behind practical spectacles and a slender build that belied her inner strength, she had always prided herself on her self-possession. She'd survived her father's death and the subsequent loss of their modest Boston home. She'd endured working as a companion to the insufferable Mrs. Whitcomb for 3 years. She had made the practical decision to become a mail-order bride after careful consideration of her limited options. Yet something in Hank's expression made her heart falter. "Yes, Jacob Garrett," she repeated, more firmly this time. "We're to be married today, June 12th. He was quite specific about the date. Hank removed his hat, revealing a sun-browned scalp beneath thinning grey hair. "Miss, I'm afraid there's been... You might want to speak with Sheriff Miller, or perhaps Reverend Hayes." He nodded toward a whitewashed building down the street. "Church is that way. Parson might be the gentler option." "Please," Eleanor said, her voice steady despite the growing unease. "If you know something about Mr. Garrett's whereabouts, I'd appreciate directness." The driver sighed heavily. "The Midas Touch collapsed 3 weeks back. Cave-in took the main shaft and half the side tunnels. Jacob Garrett was inside, along with 11 other men. They've recovered 7 bodies so far." He twisted his hat in his hands. "I'm mighty sorry to be the one to tell you this, Ma'am." The world seemed to tilt beneath Eleanor's sensibly heeled boots. She grasped the side of the stagecoach to steady herself. "That can't be right," she said, fighting to keep her voice level. "I received a letter from him just 5 weeks ago, confirming today's date." "Mail can be slow getting through these parts," Hank offered, clearly uncomfortable with her distress. "Letter probably went out before the collapse." Eleanor closed her eyes briefly, gathering her composure. Jacob Garrett had been her salvation, or so she'd believed. Their correspondence had grown from formal introduction to genuine connection over 18 months. He'd described his successful mining operation, his comfortable home built on the hillside overlooking Redemption Creek, and his desire for an educated partner rather than merely a housekeeper or bedmate. Eleanor had been drawn to his intelligence, his ambition tempered with kindness, and his apparent respect for her own mind. Now he was gone, and she was alone, nearly penniless, in a mining town 2,000 miles from anything familiar. "Is there somewhere I might stay while I consider my situation?" she asked finally. "Widow Abernathy runs a respectable boarding house," Hank replied. "Blue clapboard building 3 doors down from the Mercantile. Tell her I sent you. She sometimes makes arrangements for those in difficult circumstances." Eleanor nodded her thanks. She would not break down in the middle of the street in front of strangers. She would maintain her dignity, if nothing else. "I can manage my trunk," she began, but Hank waved her off. "I'll have one of the boys bring it along. No extra charge." His kindness nearly undid her carefully maintained composure. As the stagecoach departed in a cloud of dust, Eleanor found herself the subject of curious glances from the few people on the street. Taking a deep breath, she straightened her shoulders and began walking toward the blue clapboard building Hank had indicated. Each step felt leaden as the reality of her situation settled upon her like a physical weight. The boarding house proved easy to find. A hand-painted sign reading Abernathy Lodgings hung beside the door, which was flanked by 2 rocking chairs and a collection of potted geraniums that provided the first real color Eleanor had seen in Redemption Creek. Before she could knock, the door swung open to reveal a stout woman in her 50s with silver-streaked dark hair pulled back in a practical bun. Sharp blue eyes assessed Eleanor from head to toe. "You'd be the bride come for Jacob Garrett," the woman said matter-of-factly. "Word travels fast in small towns. I'm Sarah Abernathy." Eleanor Crawford. She managed to keep her voice steady. "I understand Mr. Garrett was in the mine when it collapsed." Sarah Abernathy's expression softened slightly. "Come inside, child. This isn't a conversation for the front porch." The interior of the boarding house was clean and modestly furnished, with a parlor to the right of the entryway and a dining room. Visible beyond, the scent of fresh-baked bread and coffee hung in the air, smells that would have been comforting under different circumstances. "Sit," Mrs. Abernathy directed, gesturing to a horsehair sofa. "I'll fetch some tea. You look like you could use something stronger, but tea will have to do for now." Eleanor sank onto the sofa, removing her gloves and setting them beside her reticule. A small clock ticked steadily on the mantel, marking time in a life suddenly bereft of direction. Mrs. Abernathy returned with a tea tray and poured a cup for Eleanor before settling into an armchair opposite her. Jacob Garrett was a good man, she said without preamble, one of the few mine owners who treated his workers fairly, paid wages on time, insisted on proper timbering even when it cut into profits. She stirred sugar into her own tea, made him some enemies among the other mine owners, but the men who worked for him would have walked through fire if he asked. "We corresponded for 18 months, Eleanor said, finding comfort in the simple facts. He seemed thoughtful, intelligent. He was both of those things, Mrs. Abernathy agreed, and excited about your arrival. Had his house all fixed up proper, with books and even a piano brought all the way from Denver." She paused. "It's a terrible shame what happened." The driver, Hank, mentioned a cave-in. Was it a natural occurrence? Eleanor asked, surprising herself with the question. Something flickered in Mrs. Abernathy's eyes. "That's what the official report says. Natural shifting of the rock face, weakened support beams." She set down her teacup with deliberate care. "But there are those who have their doubts." Doubts? Mrs. Abernathy leaned forward slightly. Jacob had found something in the north shaft, something that had him excited but cautious. He'd hired extra guards for the mine entrance, started carrying important papers with him instead of leaving them in his office. She glanced toward the window as if checking who might be passing by. 2 days before the collapse, he'd been arguing with Stanley Reed in the assay office. Reed owns the Golconda mine that borders the Midas Touch property. Eleanor set down her untouched tea. "Are you suggesting the collapse wasn't an accident?" "I'm not suggesting anything, Miss Crawford, just sharing what I know." Mrs. Abernathy's tone made it clear she believed otherwise. "Redemption Creek has changed since the cave-in. Reed's men have been pressuring Jacob's surviving workers to sell their claims at a fraction of their worth. The sheriff seems uninterested in investigating despite evidence of tampering brought to him by William Hayes, Jacob's foreman." A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. A young boy stood on the porch, Eleanor's trunk beside him. "Driver said to bring this here," he explained, as Mrs. Abernathy directed the boy to take the trunk upstairs. Eleanor remained seated, her mind racing. She had come to Redemption Creek, expecting to marry a successful mine owner and begin a new life. Instead, she found herself alone in a strange town with dwindling funds and nowhere to go. The practical choice would be to secure passage back east on the next stagecoach. Yet something in Mrs. Abernathy's words stirred a different impulse. If Jacob had indeed been murdered, didn't she owe him at least the effort to uncover the truth? And practical concerns aside, where would she go? Her position with Mrs. Whitcomb had been filled, her family home sold to pay her father's debts. She was still contemplating her limited options when the front door opened again without a knock. A tall man filled the doorway, his broad shoulders nearly touching both sides of the frame. Despite the summer heat, he wore a long duster over dark trousers and a faded blue shirt. A badge gleamed on his vest, not the local sheriff's star, but the shield of a U.S. Marshal. "Sarah," he acknowledged Mrs. Abernathy with a nod before his gaze settled on Eleanor. His eyes were a striking shade of grey, set in a face that might have been handsome if not for the jagged scar that ran from his right temple down his cheek, disappearing into a short beard that didn't quite hide the damage. "You must be Miss Crawford," he said, removing his hat to reveal dark hair cut short and beginning to grey at the temples. "I'm U.S. Marshal Daniel Wade. We need to talk about Jacob Garrett." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Eleanor's grip tightened on her reticule as she studied the imposing marshal. His weathered face spoke of years spent in harsh conditions, and his stance, alert yet seemingly relaxed, reminded her of a mountain lion she'd once seen illustrated in a natural history book. Poised for action even in repose. "What interest does a U.S. Marshal have in a local mining accident?" she asked, rising from the sofa to reduce the disadvantage of height. A flicker of something, approval perhaps, crossed Marshal Wade's face. "A fair question, Miss Crawford." He stepped fully into the parlor, closing the door behind him. "May I?" He gestured to the chair opposite her. Mrs. Abernathy nodded. "I'll fetch another cup." When she had left the room, Marshal Wade leaned forward, lowering his voice. "The collapse of the Midas Touch wasn't my original assignment. I came to Redemption Creek investigating a series of gold shipment robberies between here and Helena. But certain irregularities surrounding Garrett's death caught my attention." "What irregularities?" Eleanor asked. "For one, the timing. Jacob was killed 3 days after he filed an official boundary dispute with the Territorial Land Office." The Marshal's expression remained carefully neutral. He claimed Stanley Reed's Golconda mine had been working a vein that crossed onto Midas Touch property. Mrs. Abernathy returned with another cup, which the Marshal accepted with a nod of thanks. "You believe Mr. Reed had something to do with the collapse?" Eleanor said, after Mrs. Abernathy had settled back into her chair. "I believe it's a remarkable coincidence that the collapse occurred in the precise section of the mine where Jacob claimed Reed was stealing his gold." Marshal Wade sipped his tea, grimacing slightly at the sweetness. "Made more remarkable by the fact that William Hayes, Jacob's foreman, found evidence of recently placed blasting charges near that same tunnel junction the day before the collapse." Eleanor's mind whirled with this new information. "If there's evidence of sabotage, why hasn't the local sheriff acted?" Mrs. Abernathy snorted softly. "Sheriff Miller spends more time at Reed's poker table than he does enforcing the law. The territorial circuit judge won't be through for another month," the Marshal added. "By then, Reed will have consolidated his control over most of Redemption Creek's mining operations, including what's left of the Midas Touch claim." Eleanor frowned. "But surely Mr. Garrett's property would pass to his next of kin, not simply become available to the first person to claim it." Marshal Wade and Mrs. Abernathy exchanged glances. "Jacob had no family," Mrs. Abernathy explained. "None that anyone here knows of, at least." "Under territorial mining law," the Marshal continued, "if a claim holder dies without heirs or business partners, the claim reverts to public domain after 1 year. However, if someone can prove they have a legitimate interest in the property through formal business arrangements or family connection, they can petition for immediate transfer of ownership." Eleanor considered this. "And Mr. Reed is attempting to establish such a claim?" "Not directly, too obvious." Marshal Wade set down his cup. "A man named Francis Parker arrived from San Francisco last week, claiming to be Jacob's half-brother. He's filed paperwork with both the local clerk and the Territorial Land Office." "But Jacob was an orphan," Eleanor said without thinking. "He was raised in the St. Vincent Home for Boys in Philadelphia until he was 14. The Marshal's eyes sharpened with interest. "You're certain of this?" "He mentioned it in his 3rd letter to me. He said it was why he valued self-reliance and why he had created his success without the advantage of family connections or inherited position." She had memorized that particular passage, touched by the parallels to her own reduced circumstances following her father's death. "That's valuable information, Miss Crawford." For the first time, a ghost of a smile touched the Marshal's scarred face. "Parker's claim just became considerably more complicated." Eleanor straightened her shoulders. "I still don't understand why you're sharing this with me, Marshal Wade. While I appreciate being informed about Mr. Garrett's situation, I fail to see how I can be of further assistance." The Marshal studied her for a long moment. "Jacob's letters to you might contain information he shared with no one else, details about what he found in the North Shaft, specifics about his dispute with Reed, or other business matters that could help establish the truth about his death." A chill ran through Eleanor, despite the warmth of the parlor. "You want to read my private correspondence with Mr. Garrett?" Only what might be relevant to the investigation, he clarified, and only with your permission. She hesitated, torn, between protecting the privacy of Jacob's words and potentially helping bring his killers to justice. There's something else you should consider, Miss Crawford, Mrs. Abernathy interjected gently. As Jacob's intended bride, with documented correspondence discussing business matters, you might have grounds to claim an interest in the Midas touch yourself. Eleanor blinked in surprise. Surely a mere engagement wouldn't qualify me as having a legitimate interest in his property. Normally, no, Marshal Wade acknowledged. But Jacob's last registered will, filed with the territorial court in Helena last year, mentioned providing for his future wife, though it didn't specify a name. If you can establish that you were that intended bride through your correspondence, combined with evidence he was preparing for your arrival, it would at least delay Reed's plans until the circuit judge arrives. Mrs. Abernathy finished. Give the marshal time to build a case about the sabotage. Eleanor rose and walked to the window, needing space to think. The street outside was growing busier as afternoon faded toward evening. Men in dusty work clothes made their way toward what she presumed was the saloon, while shopkeepers swept their boardwalks in the day's waning light. She had come to redemption, Creek expecting marriage, stability, perhaps eventually affection. Instead, she found herself being drawn into what appeared to be a murder investigation and a high-stakes property dispute. The sensible course would be to distance herself completely, to use what little money she had left to secure passage back, east. But to what? No home, no position, and the looming threat of accepting her father's former business partner's persistent offer of marriage. A man 30 years her senior whose wandering hands during his visits had made his true interest in her painfully clear. She turned back to face the marshal and Mrs. Abernathy. My trunk contains all of Mr. Garrett's letters, as well as copies of my responses that I made before sending them. You're welcome to review them, Marshal Wade. She paused. However, I retain the right to determine which portions are relevant to your investigation. He nodded, accepting her terms. Fair enough. And the matter of the claim? Eleanor drew a steadying breath. If there is indeed a legitimate basis for me to assert an interest in Mr. Garrett's property, I would be willing to explore that option, not out of any desire for personal gain, but because it seems Mr. Garrett deserves better than to have his life's work stolen by the very man who may have arranged his death. Something that might have been respect flickered in the marshal's grey eyes. I'll arrange for you to meet with Judge Wilson's clerk tomorrow. He can advise on the legal particulars. In the meantime, Mrs. Abernathy said, rising, you'll need a place to stay. I have a room at the back of the house, small but private, with its own entrance. $2 a week includes breakfast and supper. Eleanor mentally reviewed her finances. After the stagecoach fare and necessary expenses during her journey, she had exactly $27.43 remaining. If she were frugal, it would last nearly 3 months at Mrs. Abernathy's rates. That would be most appreciated, she said. A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Mrs. Abernathy opened it to reveal a young man of about 20, with sandy hair and earnest blue eyes. Pardon the intrusion, Mrs. Abernathy, he said, removing his hat. Doc Sullivan sent me to fetch the marshal. There's been trouble at the Midas Touch property. Marshal Wade was on his feet immediately. What kind of trouble, Sam? William Hayes was checking the remaining equipment in the North Tunnel when he encountered some of Reed's men. There was an altercation. The young man twisted his hat nervously. Hayes was shot. He's at the doctor's office now, asking for you specifically. Wade turned to Eleanor. We'll continue this discussion later. For now, I suggest you settle in and rest. It's been a long journey, and tomorrow will bring its own challenges. As the marshal departed with the young messenger, Mrs. Abernathy placed a comforting hand on Eleanor's arm. Come, let me show you to your room. You look ready to... A drop from exhaustion. Eleanor allowed herself to be led upstairs, her mind still processing the whirlwind of information. The room was indeed small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand with porcelain pitcher and bowl, and a small writing desk beneath the window that overlooked a kitchen garden behind the house. "Supper's at 6, Mrs. Abernathy informed her. "Nothing fancy but filling. Breakfast at 7. You're welcome to use the parlour if you need more space to work through those letters with the marshal." When the older woman had gone, Eleanor sank onto the edge of the bed, finally allowing the emotions of the day to surface. She had travelled across the country to marry a man she'd never met, only to discover he'd died in suspicious circumstances weeks before her arrival. Now she found herself potentially involved in both a murder investigation and a legal battle over mining rights. She removed her spectacles and pressed her fingertips against her closed eyelids. What would her father have advised in such a situation? George Crawford had been a professor of mathematics at a small Boston college, a man of precision and logic who nonetheless had encouraged his daughter's independence of thought. When presented with an unexpected equation, he would say, first determine what variables you can control. Eleanor opened her eyes and glanced at her trunk, which had been delivered to the foot of her bed. Within it lay not only Jacob's letters, but her entire life's possessions: 3 dresses, practical undergarments, a nightgown, her father's pocket watch, a small collection of cherished books, and a daguerreotype of her parents taken shortly before her mother's death. Hardly the resources with which to take on corrupt mine owners and solve a murder, yet she found herself oddly reluctant to abandon the matter. Perhaps it was the lingering sense of connection she felt to Jacob through his letters, or perhaps it was simply that after years of accommodating others' needs and desires, first as a dutiful daughter, then as Mrs. Whitcomb's companion, she found herself drawn to a purpose of her own choosing. As the last light of day faded from her window, Eleanor made her decision. She would stay in Redemption Creek, at least long enough to learn the truth about Jacob Garrett's death. She owed him that much for the hope his letters had given her during the darkest period of her life. And if, in the process, she could prevent Stanley Reed from profiting from murder, so much the better. Supper at the Abernathy boarding house proved to be a subdued affair. Besides Eleanor, there were 3 other boarders: Miss Lucille Hammond, a spinster schoolteacher with wire-rimmed spectacles and a perpetually worried expression; Edison Pierce, an elderly assayer who had lost his business in the mine collapse, but continued to offer his services from a small office behind the mercantile; and Peter Simmons, a quiet young telegrapher who maintained the town's tenuous connection to the outside world. The conversation centered primarily on William Hayes's condition, which Miss Hammond had gleaned from her position as occasional assistant. To Doc Sullivan, "The bullet passed clean through his shoulder," she reported, as Mrs. Abernathy served a hearty beef stew. "Doc says he's lucky. An inch to the right, and it would have hit something vital." "Did he say what happened?" Eleanor asked, trying to piece together the events that had occurred before her arrival, only that he was checking the secondary ventilation shaft when he encountered 3 men who claimed to be working for Reed. Peter's voice was soft but clear. They ordered him off the property, claiming it now belonged to Mr. Parker as Jacob's heir. When Hayes refused, showing his legal papers as mine foreman, one of them shot him, Edison snorted derisively. "Legal papers don't mean much when facing men like Tucker Jones. Reed's head of security is a former bounty hunter with 6 notches on his gun. Man would shoot his own mother if Reed paid him enough." "Edison," Mrs. Abernathy chided, though without much conviction. "It's the truth, Sarah, and Miss Crawford deserves to know what kind of men she's dealing with." The elderly assayer turned to Eleanor. "Stanley Reed came to Redemption Creek 3 years ago with Eastern money behind him, bought up the Golconda claim when it was barely producing, and turned it into the second most profitable operation in the territory. Man's ambitious, ruthless, and doesn't take kindly to obstacles. And Jacob Garrett was an obstacle? Eleanor asked. The biggest. Edison nodded. Midas Touch was producing twice the gold of the Golconda with half the workers, thanks to Jacob's innovations in extraction methods. Plus, his men were loyal because he treated them fair. Profit-sharing, decent housing, even a small school. For the children. I teach there, Miss Hammond added, or did before the collapse. Now most of the families have moved on, seeking work elsewhere. Eleanor considered this information carefully. Mr. Garrett never mentioned problems with Mr. Reed in his letters to me. He described his business as thriving, but straightforward. Jacob wasn't one to worry others with his troubles, Mrs. Abernathy said, refilling Eleanor's water glass. Especially a lady he was courting, Peter cleared his throat. He did send several telegrams to a lawyer in Helena in the weeks before the collapse. Very specific messages about claim boundaries and mineral rights. I remember because they were longer than usual, and he paid extra to ensure accurate transmission. Eleanor's attention sharpened. Do you keep copies of the telegrams sent from your office? The young man nodded. For 6 months, yes. Company policy. I'd be interested to see those messages if it wouldn't violate any confidentiality. Peter hesitated. Normally I couldn't share them, but since you might have a claim as Jacob's intended, I suppose it would be permissible. I can bring copies tomorrow morning. The conversation shifted to more general topics as the meal continued. But Eleanor's mind remained focused on the emerging picture of Jacob Garrett's final weeks. By the time she retired to her room, she had formed a clearer understanding of Redemption Creek's power dynamics and Jacob's position within them. She was unpacking her trunk when a soft knock sounded at her door. Marshal Wade stood in the hallway, his imposing height made more evident in the narrow space. "Pardon the late hour, Miss Crawford," he said, removing his hat. "I've just come from Doc Sullivan's office. Hayes is stable but weak from blood loss. Before he fell asleep, he mentioned something I thought might interest you." Eleanor gestured for him to enter, leaving the door partially open for propriety's sake. "Please, what did he say?" Hayes confirmed he was checking the north ventilation shaft because Jacob had hidden something there just before the collapse, documents and samples too valuable to keep in his office. The marshal's expression was carefully neutral. He believes whatever Jacob found was significant enough that Reed would kill to possess it. Did Mr. Hayes specify what these items might be? No, but he mentioned Jacob had been particularly excited about a new vein they'd discovered. That Jacob had been acting increasingly secretive, trusting only Hayes with certain information. Wade hesitated. He also mentioned Jacob had created a cipher for his most sensitive correspondence, one that only his future wife would be able to decipher. Eleanor blinked in surprise. A cipher? Jacob never mentioned anything of the sort in his letters to me. Perhaps he didn't need to. Hayes suggested it might be based on something you would recognize from your correspondence. The marshal studied her with those penetrating grey eyes. Have you had a chance to review his letters since our earlier conversation? Not yet. I was planning to do so after supper. She gestured to her trunk, where the cedar box containing Jacob's correspondence lay nestled among her belongings. Wade nodded. I won't keep you then, but I would suggest you examine those letters carefully, particularly any that mention the mine operations or business matters. The sooner we understand what Jacob discovered, the better position we'll be in to counter Reed's maneuvers. After the marshal departed, Eleanor retrieved the cedar box and carried it to the small writing desk. Inside were 24 letters from Jacob, arranged chronologically, each in its original envelope. Beside them lay her own copies of her responses, carefully transcribed before sending. She began with Jacob's earliest letters, which were primarily introductions and polite inquiries about her interests and background. As their correspondence progressed, The tone grew warmer, more personal, though always maintaining proper respect. Jacob had described his mining operation with enthusiasm, but in general terms. Production figures, expansion plans, the growing community around the Midas touch. It wasn't until his 12th letter, dated 4 months ago, that she noticed something unusual. In the midst of a paragraph about spring arriving in the mountains, Jacob had written, "When the columbines bloom on the high slopes, we miners know the worst of winter has passed. Their 5-pointed stars remind me of the constellation." Cassiopeia, you mentioned enjoying in your night sky observations. I think often of your description of stargazing from your father's garden, how the quiet mathematics of celestial movements brought you comfort after his passing. The reference seemed oddly specific, especially since she had only briefly mentioned her interest in astronomy in one of her earlier letters. And while she had indeed found solace in stargazing after her father's death, she wasn't certain she had expressed it in quite those terms. Eleanor reached for her copy of the response she had sent to that letter. She had acknowledged his reference to Cassiopeia, but hadn't elaborated further, assuming it was simply polite conversation. Returning to Jacob's letters, she found 2 more similar references in subsequent correspondence. One to the golden ratio of a perfect crystal formation discovered in the mine, and another to Fibonacci's sequence appearing in the most unexpected places, like nature's own signature. These comments had seemed charming at the time, evidence of Jacob's educated mind and attention to her interests. Now, with the marshal's words about a cipher in mind, she wondered if they might hold deeper significance. Her father had been a mathematician who specialized in number theory and had often entertained Eleanor with puzzles and codes based on mathematical principles. One of his favorites had been a simple substitution cipher using the Fibonacci sequence as a key. Heart racing, Eleanor retrieved a fresh sheet of paper and began examining the 3 letters with mathematical references more carefully. If Jacob had indeed created a cipher based on what he knew of her background, this seemed the most likely approach. After an hour of careful analysis, patterns began to emerge. Certain words in those letters seemed deliberately chosen, their placement unnaturally precise. When she applied a basic Fibonacci substitution to the first letter of each of these words, a message appeared. North shaft, 3rd support beam, hollow contains proof, reed stealing gold, and more valuable discovery documentation. In office, safe combination 1842, 733. Eleanor sat back, her hands trembling slightly. This was it, the cipher Hayes had mentioned. Jacob had hidden his evidence in the mine itself, with duplicates secured in his office safe. The combination matched the numbers the marshal had mentioned finding marked in the book. A soft creak outside her door jerked Eleanor's attention away from the cipher. Through the partially open doorway, she glimpsed a shadow moving in the hallway, too large to be Mrs. Abernathy, too stealthy to be one of the other boarders. Quickly, she extinguished her lamp, plunging the room into darkness, broken only by moonlight filtering through the curtains. The floorboard outside her door creaked again, followed by the unmistakable sound of the doorknob turning slowly. Eleanor reached for the small Derringer pistol her father had insisted she carry on her journey west. She had never fired it at anything other than targets, but she raised it steadily as the door began to open wider. A large figure filled the doorway, silhouetted against the dim light from the hall sconce. Not Marshal Wade. This man was broader, with a distinctive bowler hat visible in outline. His hand rose, revealing the dull gleam of a revolver. Without conscious thought, Eleanor squeezed the Derringer's trigger. The report was deafening in the small room, accompanied by a flash that momentarily blinded her. A pained grunt and the thud of something heavy hitting the floor followed. Doors flew open along the hallway. Mrs. Abernathy appeared with a shotgun in hand, while Peter emerged from his room, clutching a poker from his fireplace. "Eleanor, are you all right?" Mrs. Abernathy called, her voice steady despite the situation. "Yes," Eleanor managed, rising from her chair on shaky legs, "but I believe someone was trying to enter my room." Peter had retrieved a lamp and now held it over the fallen figure. The man lay sprawled half in and half out of Eleanor's doorway, blood seeping from a wound in his upper chest. The bowler hat had rolled across the floor, revealing a shock of ginger hair. "That's Oliver Doyle," Mrs. Abernathy said grimly. "One of Reed's new men, arrived in town last week." Eleanor stared at the wounded intruder, the derringer still clutched in her trembling hand. "He had a gun. I saw it when he opened the door." Peter knelt to examine the fallen man. "He's alive, but the bullets lodged deep. We need to get Doc Sullivan." "I'll go," offered Edison, who had appeared in his nightshirt and cap. "The marshal should know about this too." As the elderly assayer hurried downstairs, Mrs. Abernathy placed a gentle hand on Eleanor's shoulder. "Come to the kitchen, child. You need something stronger than tea after this." Eleanor allowed herself to be led downstairs, her mind still processing what had just occurred. She had shot a man, an experience she had never imagined having. Let alone on her first night in Redemption Creek. More disturbing was the realization that Reed had already identified her as a threat, enough to send one of his men to eliminate her, which meant the cipher she had just decoded was indeed valuable, and Jacob's hidden evidence might be the key to understanding not only his death, but the true value of the Midas touch claim. She had uncovered part of the puzzle, but many questions remained. Why had Jacob been so secretive about his discovery? What had he found that was even more valuable than gold? And most pressingly, could she reach the evidence before Reed's men discovered its location? As Mrs. Abernathy poured whiskey into a teacup with steady hands, Eleanor made a silent vow. She had come to Redemption Creek seeking a new beginning. Instead, she had found mystery, danger, and the echo of a voice silenced. Too soon. For Jacob's sake, and now for her own, she would uncover the truth no matter the cost. Marshal Wade arrived at Mrs. Abernathy's boarding house within 20 minutes of Edison's summons, accompanied by Doc Sullivan, a silver-haired man with kind eyes and a permanently furrowed brow. The doctor immediately attended to Oliver Doyle, who had been moved to the parlor sofa under Peter's watchful eye. "You're fortunate, Miss Crawford," Marshal Wade said quietly as he joined Eleanor in the kitchen. "Doyle is known for his thoroughness. Few have survived his nighttime visits." Eleanor's hands were steady now as she sipped the whiskey-laced tea Mrs. Abernathy had provided. "I was raised to be practical, Marshal. My father insisted I learn to handle a firearm before I traveled west." Something that might have been admiration flickered in Wade's gray eyes. "Your father was a wise man." He settled his large frame onto a kitchen chair that creaked in protest. "Care to tell me why Reed would send one of his more lethal employees to call on you so soon after your arrival?" Eleanor glanced toward the door to ensure they wouldn't be overheard, then extracted the paper containing the decoded cipher from her pocket. "I believe I've found what Mr. Hayes mentioned, Jacob's cipher." She passed the paper to Wade. "These mathematical references in Jacob's letters formed a pattern. When deciphered, they revealed this message." The marshal read it silently, his expression hardening. "The safe combination matches the numbers marked in the book. But this mention of something more valuable than gold," he looked up. "Any idea what that might be?" Eleanor shook her head. "Jacob never specified in his letters. He described the Midas touch as primarily a gold operation with some silver deposits." Wade folded the paper carefully and tucked it into his vest pocket. "Whatever it is, Reed wants it badly enough to eliminate potential complications quickly. Doyle isn't a man sent for warnings. He's Reed's final solution to problems." A soft knock at the kitchen door announced Doc Sullivan's arrival. "Doyle will live," he reported, wiping his hands on a cloth. "The bullet missed his heart by an inch, lodged against his shoulder blade. I've removed it and stitched him up, but he'll need to remain still for several days." "Is he conscious?" Wade asked. The doctor nodded. "Groggy from the laudanum, but coherent. He's asking to speak with you privately, Marshal." Wade raised an eyebrow. "That's unexpected. Doyle's not known for cooperation with law enforcement. Perhaps a bullet in the chest has encouraged him to reconsider his allegiances," Eleanor suggested. The Marshal's scarred face creased in what might have been the ghost of a smile. "Perhaps. Doc, stay with Miss Crawford. Mrs. Abernathy has a shotgun, but I'd prefer additional protection in case Reed sends reinforcements." As Wade departed for the parlor, Doc Sullivan settled into the chair he had vacated. "So you're Jacob's mail-order bride," he said, studying Eleanor with kind but assessing eyes. "He spoke of you often these past months. Was quite excited about your arrival." Eleanor felt a pang of grief for the man she would never meet, whose letters had painted such a promising future. "You knew him well." "As well as anyone in Redemption Creek, I suppose. Treated him for a broken arm when a support beam collapsed last year, and for various minor injuries that come with mining work." The doctor accepted a cup of coffee from Mrs. Abernathy. "He was a private man in many ways, but spoke openly of his hopes for your life together." "What can you tell me about his relationship with Stanley Reed?" Eleanor asked. Doc Sullivan's expression darkened. "Contentious from the start, Reed arrived with Eastern backing and immediately began buying up smaller claims, sometimes using questionable methods. Jacob was the only mine owner who consistently refused his offers and challenged his business practices." Was Reed capable of arranging the mine collapse to eliminate a rival? The doctor considered this. 2 years ago, I would have said no. Reed was ambitious, but operated within certain boundaries. But recently, he shook his head. "Power reveals character, Miss Crawford. As Reed's influence in Redemption Creek has grown, so has his willingness to cross lines previously unthinkable." Their conversation was interrupted by Marshal Wade's return. His expression was grim as he addressed Eleanor. "Doyle has confirmed our suspicions. Reed ordered him to retrieve Jacob's letters from you and eliminate any potential witnesses." He glanced at Doc Sullivan. "He's also confirmed that the collapse was deliberately engineered. Reed hired specialists from Nevada with experience in controlled demolitions." Eleanor felt a chill despite the kitchen's warmth. "And Mr. Hayes, was he specifically targeted today?" According to Doyle, Reed learned Hayes had been accessing the north shaft despite the collapse having sealed most of the mine. He suspected Hayes was retrieving something Jacob had hidden. Wade's jaw tightened. "Reed has offered a substantial reward for anyone who finds and delivers certain documents and samples Jacob secured before his death." "The evidence from the cipher," Eleanor murmured. "We need to reach it before Reed's men do." "Agreed, but not tonight." Wade glanced at the kitchen clock, which showed nearly midnight. "Reed will have men watching Jacob's property now, especially after Hayes's shooting. We'll need daylight and a strategy." Doc Sullivan cleared his throat. "I should return to my office. Mr. Hayes will need tending, and I've left him with only my assistant. What about Doyle?" "He stays here under guard," Wade decided. "I've sent for Deputy Clark to stand watch. Reed would eliminate Doyle as a loose end if he could reach him." After the doctor departed, Mrs. Abernathy insisted Eleanor return to bed. "Tomorrow will bring its own challenges. You need rest." Despite her exhaustion, sleep proved elusive. Eleanor lay awake, reviewing the day's extraordinary events. She had arrived in Redemption Creek, a mail-order bride with modest expectations for her future. Within hours, she had discovered her intended's death, uncovered evidence of murder, decoded a secret message, and shot a man who intended to kill her. Her practical nature rebelled at the melodrama of it all, yet she couldn't deny the facts. Jacob Garrett had discovered something valuable enough to die for. Stanley Reed was willing to commit murder to possess it, and she, Eleanor Crawford, had somehow become central to this dangerous situation. As dawn lightened her window, she made a decision. She would meet with Judge Wilson's clerk as Marshal Wade had arranged, establishing her potential claim to the Midas Touch property. But more importantly, she would find the evidence Jacob had hidden, both to bring his killers to justice and to understand what discovery had cost him his life. When she descended for breakfast, Marshal Wade was already in the dining room conferring with Deputy Clerk, a young man with earnest features and a nervous habit of adjusting his collar. "How is Mr. Doyle this morning?" she asked, accepting a cup of coffee from Mrs. Abernathy. "Surprisingly talkative," Wade replied. "Fear is a powerful motivator, and Reed's potential retribution appears to frighten him more than legal consequences. He's provided details about Reed's operation, including the names of the men who set the charges that caused the mine collapse. Will that be enough to arrest Mr. Reed?" Wade shook his head. "We need physical evidence linking him to the sabotage. Doyle wasn't directly involved in the collapse. He's primarily Reed's problem solver for more targeted eliminations." The Marshal's expression made clear exactly what that euphemism meant. Eleanor considered this as she ate the hearty breakfast Mrs. Abernathy provided. The cipher mentioned evidence hidden in both the north shaft and in Jacob's office safe. Which location would be easier to access? "The house is less guarded than the mine," Wade said. "Reed has focused his security on the Midas Touch property itself, particularly the north shaft entrance that survived the collapse." "Then we should start with the house," Eleanor decided. "When is my appointment with Judge Wilson's clerk?" 10 o'clock. Mr. Hollister has agreed to meet us at his office next to the Territorial Bank. Wade studied her with those penetrating grey eyes. "Are you certain you want to pursue this, Miss Crawford? Establishing a claim to the Midas Touch will only increase Reed's determination to eliminate you as an obstacle." Eleanor met his gaze steadily. "I came to Redemption Creek expecting to build a life with Jacob Garrett. While that's no longer possible, I can at least ensure justice for his death and prevent his murderer from profiting from it." A hint of respect appeared in the Marshal's expression. "Very well. After your meeting with Hollister, we'll visit Jacob's house. I've arranged for Deputy Clerk to create a diversion that should draw Reed's watchers away temporarily." The clerk's office was a cramped space filled with leather-bound legal volumes and stacks of documents in various stages of processing. Albert Hollister himself proved to be a precise man of middle years, with ink-stained fingers and spectacles perched on a prominent nose. "A potential spousal claim without an actual marriage is unusual," he admitted after reviewing the documentation Eleanor provided. Jacob's letters discussing business matters and preparations for their life together. "However, given Mr. Garrett's explicit mentions of your role in the mine's future operations and his documented will provision for a future wife, there may be grounds for a conditional claim." "Conditional on what?" Eleanor asked. "On proving you were indeed the intended bride referenced in the will," Hollister explained. "Mr. Parker's claim as a blood relative would normally take precedence, but if he's demonstrated to be fraudulent, and you can establish ongoing business correspondence with the deceased," he adjusted his spectacles, "I can file a temporary stay preventing transfer of ownership until Judge Wilson's arrival next month." "And in the meantime," Marshal Wade inquired, "Miss Crawford would have limited rights to access the property for inventory purposes, though not operational control." The clerk dipped his pen and began drafting the necessary documents. "Given the circumstances, I believe Judge Wilson would look favorably on such an arrangement." As they left the clerk's office an hour later, preliminary paperwork filed, and a temporary access order in hand, Eleanor felt a curious mixture of accomplishment and apprehension. "What happens if we find Jacob's evidence?" she asked as they walked toward the livery where Wade had arranged for horses. "We submit it to Judge Wilson directly when he arrives, bypassing local authorities who might be compromised." Wade's hand rested near his holstered revolver, a habit Eleanor had noticed when he was scanning for potential threats. "In the meantime, we focus on survival and gathering as much supporting evidence as possible." Eleanor nodded, squaring her shoulders. "Then let's begin with Jacob's house. I'm particularly interested in seeing what's in that safe." As they mounted their horses, Wade on a powerful black gelding, Eleanor on a gentle bay mare Mrs. Abernathy had arranged for her, neither noticed the figure watching from the shadowed alley beside the assay office. Nor could they hear, as he whispered to his companion, "They're heading for Garrett's place. Tell Mr. Reed our mail-order bride is proving more troublesome than anticipated." Jacob Garrett's house stood on a gentle rise overlooking Redemption Creek, a testament to his success and optimism. Unlike the hastily constructed buildings common in mining towns, this was a permanent structure, a two-story home built of locally quarried stone and quality timber, with large windows that caught the mountain light. A covered porch wrapped around three sides, and a small stable stood adjacent to the main building. "It's beautiful," Eleanor murmured as they approached. She'd imagined Jacob's home from his descriptions, but the reality exceeded her expectations. It was exactly the kind of place where she had hoped to build a new life. Marshal Wade's expression remained vigilant as he scanned the surroundings. "Deputy Clark should have drawn Reed's watchers away by now, but we should move quickly nonetheless." They secured their horses behind the house, out of sight from the main road. Wade drew his revolver before approaching the back door, motioning for Eleanor to stay behind him. The door was locked, but Wade produced a set of slender tools from his coat pocket. "A skill from your younger days?" Eleanor asked, watching as he manipulated the lock with practiced movements. A wry smile touched his scarred face. "Let's just say, the law sometimes requires methods the law doesn't officially sanction." The lock yielded with a click, and they entered what proved to be a well-appointed kitchen. Copper pots hung from ceiling hooks, and a cast-iron stove dominated one wall. Everything was meticulously organized, but showed a thin layer of dust, evidence of 3 weeks without occupancy. Eleanor moved through the house with a strange sense of familiarity. Jacob had described each room in his letters, and she found herself recognizing spaces she had never physically seen before. The parlor with its riverstone fireplace, the dining room set with fine china and crystal, now dust-covered, the study lined with bookshelves. Most poignant was a smaller room off the main hallway that Jacob had designated as her private sitting room. Here were the piano he had mentioned ordering from Denver, comfortable chairs positioned to catch the best light for reading, and an easel with painting supplies, remembering her mention of enjoying watercolors as a girl. "He prepared for everything," she said softly, running her fingers along the piano's polished surface. Wade, who had been examining the house with a lawman's eye for details, nodded. "Jacob was thorough in all things, which is why I believe his office safe will contain exactly what he promised in that cipher." The office occupied the southeast corner of the first floor, a handsome room dominated by a massive oak desk. Maps of the Midas Touch property hung on the walls, along with geological surveys and framed mining certificates. The safe stood in the corner, a substantial iron box with a combination dial gleaming dully in the light, filtering through lace curtains. Eleanor consulted the decoded cipher. "The combination is 1842-733. Wade turned the dial with careful precision, and the safe door swung open with a metallic groan. Inside were stacks of documents, several leather-bound ledgers, a small cash box, and a wooden case approximately the size of a cigar box. They removed the contents methodically, organizing them on the desk for examination. The ledgers contained detailed records of the Midas touch operations, production figures, payroll, equipment purchases, and maintenance costs. The documents included deeds, claim registrations, and correspondence with suppliers and buyers. Jacob was exceptionally well organized, Eleanor observed, paging through one of the ledgers. Every transaction is documented with precision. The mark of a man with nothing to hide, Wade agreed, examining the property deeds. And a stark contrast to Reed's operation. According to Doyle, Reed maintains 2 sets of books, one for official review and one showing actual production. In a folder marked Boundary Dispute, they found what appeared to be the heart of Jacob's conflict with Reed: surveyors' reports, official claim maps, and a series of increasingly heated letters between Jacob and Reed regarding ore extraction along their shared property line. "Here," Wade said, extracting a document dated just 2 weeks before the collapse. Jacob commissioned an independent survey that shows Reed's operation tunneled nearly 30 yards into Midas Touch property. Based on production reports, Reed extracted approximately $50,000 worth of gold from Jacob's claim over 6 months. That would certainly constitute motive, Eleanor said, especially if Jacob was preparing to file formal charges, which this indicates he was. Wade held up another document, a partially completed legal complaint addressed to the Territorial Mining Commissioner. Reed would have faced not only financial penalties, but potential criminal charges for claim jumping and theft. Eleanor turned her attention to the wooden case, which was secured with a small brass lock. A quick search of the desk drawers yielded a ring of keys, one of which opened the case. Inside, nestled in velvet lining, lay 6 stone samples approximately the size of walnuts. They appeared unremarkable at first glance, greyish rocks with crystalline structures visible on their broken surfaces. "These don't look like gold ore," Eleanor said, lifting one carefully. Wade examined another sample, his expression shifting from puzzlement to dawning comprehension. "They're not gold." He looked up, eyes intense. "Unless I'm mistaken, these are diamond kimberlite samples." Eleanor blinked in surprise. "Diamonds? In Montana?" "It's not without precedent. There have been small findings in several Western territories, though nothing commercially viable yet." Wade turned the sample to catch the light. "But if Jacob found a substantial diamond pipe on his property, it would be worth far more than even the richest gold vein," Eleanor finished, understanding, dawning, and explaining why he became increasingly secretive and cautious. Beneath the diamond samples lay a sealed envelope addressed in Jacob's neat handwriting for the attention of the Territorial Mining Commissioner. Wade opened it carefully to reveal a detailed report on the discovery, complete with assay results from an independent laboratory in Denver, confirming the stones were indeed diamonds of commercial quality. "The assay is dated 1 week before the collapse," Eleanor noted. "Jacob was preparing to register his discovery officially, which Reed somehow learned about and acted to prevent." Wade replaced the report in the envelope. "This is the evidence. We need proof of both the boundary violation and the diamond discovery that prompted Reed to eliminate Jacob." A floorboard creaked in the hallway outside the office. Wade moved with lightning speed, drawing his revolver and positioning himself between Eleanor and the door in one fluid motion. "Marshal Wade," called a familiar voice. "It's Deputy Clark." Wade relaxed marginally, but didn't lower his weapon. "Enter slowly, Deputy." The young lawman appeared in the doorway, his expression urgent. "Reed's men have returned earlier than expected. Tucker Jones and at least 4 others are heading this way now," Wade cursed under his breath. "How much time do we have?" 5 minutes, maybe less. They're coming up the main road on horseback. Clark's gaze darted nervously to the window. Eleanor quickly gathered the most crucial documents, the boundary survey, the legal complaint, and the diamond report, and slipped them into her reticule. Wade secured the stone samples in their case and tucked it inside his coat. "Is there another way out?" Eleanor asked, remembering Jacob's descriptions of the house. "The root cellar connects to a tunnel that leads to the hillside," Clark offered. "Jacob had it built as an emergency exit in case of fire. Entrance is through the pantry off the kitchen." Wade nodded approvingly. "Lead the way, deputy." They moved swiftly through the house to the kitchen. Clark pulled aside a large storage cabinet in the pantry to reveal a trapdoor set into the floor. The sound of approaching horses became audible from outside. "I'll hold them off," Clark said, drawing his revolver. "Give you time to get clear." Wade shook his head. "Too risky. They'll kill you without hesitation. Then I'll create a diversion from the front. Make them think you're trying to escape that way." Before Wade could object, Clark was already moving toward the front of the house. "Get that evidence to Judge Wilson, Marshal. It's our only chance to end Reed's control of Redemption Creek." Eleanor and Wade descended into the root cellar as Clark's footsteps receded. The space was cool and dark, with shelves of preserved foods lining the walls. A narrow tunnel, shored up with timber supports like a mine shaft, led away from the house. "Your deputy is brave," Eleanor observed as Wade lit a lantern he found hanging by the tunnel entrance. "Brave but foolhardy. Reed's men won't hesitate to shoot a lawman if they think he's interfering with their business." Wade's expression was grim as he led the way into the tunnel. Clark's young yet, still believes in heroic gestures. The tunnel stretched approximately 50 yards, gradually sloping upward until it emerged behind a stand of juniper trees on the hillside above the house. Through the branches, they could see Reed's men surrounding the building. Tucker Jones, a tall man with a distinctive black duster, directed the others to different entrances. A shot rang out from inside the house, followed by several more in quick succession. "Clark!" Wade muttered, his jaw tightening. "Come on! We need to reach the horses." They circled wide around the property, using the terrain for cover. Their mounts remained where they had left them, tethered behind a small storage shed. As they prepared to ride, more gunfire erupted from the house. "We can't just leave him," Eleanor said, torn between escaping with the evidence and helping the young deputy. Wade's expression was conflicted, reflecting the same dilemma. Clark knew the risks. "Our priority has to be securing this evidence and getting it to Judge Wilson. You know they'll kill him," Eleanor pressed. Before Wade could respond, they heard shouting from the front of the house. Peering carefully around the shed, they saw Clark emerge onto the porch, hands raised in surrender. Tucker Jones stood before him, revolver aimed at the deputy's chest. Words were exchanged, too distant to hear clearly. Then Jones gestured to one of his men, who seized Clark and bound his wrists. "They're taking him prisoner," Wade observed with surprise. "Reed must want information." "About us? About what we found?" "Most likely." Wade checked his revolver, then secured it in his holster. "This changes things. I can't leave Clark to Reed's interrogation methods." Eleanor considered their options. "We have the evidence now. Perhaps we should separate. You could create a distraction that allows me to escape with the documents while you attempt to free Deputy Clark." Wade shook his head. "Too dangerous. Reed's men will be watching all roads out of Redemption Creek by now." He studied the terrain thoughtfully. "There's a line cabin on the northwestern edge of the Midas Touch property. Jacob used it during survey work. It's remote enough that Reed's men might not know of it. We could secure the evidence there," Eleanor suggested, "then return for Deputy Clark under cover of darkness." "Precisely. And with your legal right to access the property established this morning, we have legitimate grounds to be there if questioned." Wade helped Eleanor mount her horse. "We'll need to travel cross-country to avoid the roads. The terrain is rough but passable." As they rode away from the house, Eleanor glanced back to see Reed's men loading a bound deputy clerk onto a horse. The young lawman's face was bloodied but conscious, his expression defiant despite his circumstances. "He reminds me of you," she observed. "That same stubborn determination." A ghost of a smile touched Wade's scarred face. "Clark's a good deputy, impulsive, but his heart's in the right place." The smile faded. "Reed will use him as bait, hoping to draw me into a trap. And will he succeed?" Wade's grey eyes met hers, something unreadable passing through them. "Reed understands violence and power. What he fails to understand is that there are principles worth dying for and people worth protecting." Eleanor nodded, recognizing the unspoken resolve in his words. Marshal Daniel Wade would indeed walk into Reed's trap to save his deputy, knowing full well the dangers. It was the same sense of honor and duty that had kept him in Redemption Creek, investigating Jacob's death, when others would have accepted the official explanation. As they rode northwest across the rugged landscape, Eleanor found herself drawing strength from the marshal's steadfast presence. She had come to Montana Territory seeking security and companionship with a man she knew only through letters. Instead, she had found danger, injustice, and unexpected alliance with a scarred lawman, who embodied the principles Jacob Garrett had only written about. The irony did not escape her practical mind. But as the line cabin came into view, a simple structure nestled against a rocky outcropping, she acknowledged that for the first time since arriving in Redemption Creek, she felt purposeful. Not merely reacting to circumstances, but actively pursuing justice for a man who had offered her a future, even if that future had taken a form neither of them could have anticipated. The line cabin proved to be a single-room structure built of logs and local stone, with a small stone fireplace, a narrow cot against one wall, and basic furnishings. A rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, shelves stocked with preserved foods and mining supplies, and a trunk containing bedding and tools. Though simple, it was clean and solidly constructed, with small windows that offered views of the surrounding terrain while remaining difficult to spot from a distance. Jacob used this during his initial surveys of the property, Wade explained, as he secured their horses in a lean-to behind the cabin. Remote enough to provide privacy, but close enough to the mine for convenience. Eleanor examined the cabin with practical appreciation. It's well designed for its purpose, defensible too, with sight lines in all directions. Wade nodded approvingly at her assessment. Jacob was nothing if not thorough. There's a spring about 30 yards back that provides fresh water year-round, and the stone chimney is designed to disperse smoke rather than sending up a visible column. While Wade checked the perimeter, Eleanor organized the documents they had retrieved from Jacob's safe. The boundary dispute evidence was compelling. Survey maps, witness statements from miners, and production calculations showing exactly how much gold Reed had extracted illegally from the Midas Touch claim. Even more significant were the diamond samples and the geological report Jacob had commissioned. The report confirmed not only the presence of diamonds, but indicated a substantial kimberlite pipe, potentially one of the largest diamond deposits in North America if the preliminary findings were accurate. No wonder Reed was willing to commit. "Murder," Eleanor said when Wade returned. "This discovery would eclipse every gold mine in the territory in value and reshape the economic landscape of Montana." Wade examined the report with a lawman's methodical attention. Jacob was preparing to register the find with the proper authorities rather than attempting to mine the diamonds himself. Eleanor nodded, remembering passages from Jacob's letters. He mentioned wanting to build something lasting for the community. I assumed he meant expanding the gold operation, but perhaps he was referring to what a properly managed diamond discovery could mean for the region. which would have undermined Reed's plan to control all major mining operations in the area. Wade set down the report. Reed works through intimidation and corruption. A federally overseen diamond operation would have brought too much legitimate authority to Redemption Creek. Eleanor arranged the documents in order of importance, securing them in a waterproof oilskin packet she found among the cabin's supplies. This evidence should be sufficient to convince Judge Wilson, but we still need to reach him safely and rescue Deputy Clark. Clark is being held at Reed's office behind the Golconda mine headquarters, Wade said. I saw them taking him there. As we rode away, based on what Doyle told us about Reed's methods, we have until nightfall before serious interrogation begins. Do you have a plan? Wade checked his revolver, then began cleaning it with methodical precision. Reed expects me to attempt a rescue. He's counting on it, in fact. The direct approach would be suicide. But you have something else in mind? Eleanor observed, recognizing the calculated look in his grey eyes. A hint of a smile touched his scarred face. Reed knows Marshal Wade would never risk a civilian in a dangerous operation. So Marshal Wade won't be involved in this rescue. Eleanor raised an eyebrow. I'm not following your logic. What Reed doesn't know is that William Hayes, Jacob's foreman who was shot yesterday, has recovered enough to provide sworn testimony about the boundary violations and the evidence hidden in the north shaft. Wade reassembled his revolver. With practiced movements, Hayes is willing to present himself at Reed's office with information to trade for leniency. But Hayes was shot, Eleanor protested. He's at Doc Sullivan's office under guard. Wade holstered his weapon. Reed's men have never actually seen Hayes up close. They know he's of medium height with a beard and a distinctive green jacket that Jacob gave all his foremen. Understanding dawned. You plan to impersonate Hayes. Precisely. With a beard, the proper jacket, and a convincing shoulder bandage, I can pass for Hayes long enough to access Reed's office and locate Clark. Eleanor considered the strategy. It's risky, but it might work. What role do you see for me in this plan? You'll remain here with the evidence, Wade said firmly. If I'm not back by dawn, take the Eastern Trail to Helena. Judge Wilson will. Be there by week's end for the territorial court session. Eleanor shook her head. That's not acceptable, Marshal. I didn't travel 2,000 miles to sit passively while others determine my fate. She met his gaze steadily. I'm coming with you. Wade's expression hardened. This isn't a debate, Miss Crawford. Reed's men are killers. I'm aware of the dangers. Eleanor's voice remained calm but resolute. I've already shot one of Reed's men in self-defense, if you recall. Furthermore, your plan has a significant flaw. You need someone to create a diversion that allows you to enter in disguise. The Marshal opened his mouth to object, then closed it, recognizing the truth in her words. What did you have in mind? Stanley Reed doesn't know me, but he knows of me, the mail-order bride whose arrival might complicate his plans. Eleanor outlined her thoughts. What if I presented myself at his office, claiming to have reconsidered my position? I could offer to relinquish any claim to the Midas touch in exchange for safe passage back east. He wouldn't believe such a convenient surrender, Wade argued. He would if I appeared appropriately frightened and overwhelmed, Eleanor countered. A refined Eastern lady confronted with violence and danger, seeking the easiest escape. It's precisely what a man like Reed would expect. Wade studied her with reluctant admiration. While he's distracted with you, I could enter as Hayes through the rear entrance Doyle described. Exactly. Eleanor folded her hands in her lap. The picture of composure. Every strategy carries risk, Marshal. This one at least offers the advantage of surprise. As they refined the plan over the next few hours, Eleanor found herself drawing on skills she'd never expected to use. Her ability to present a facade of fragility when necessary, her teacher's talent for clear organization, even the social graces she'd learned as Mrs. Whitcomb's companion that allowed her to navigate difficult personalities. By late afternoon, they had established a detailed approach. Eleanor would arrive at Reed's office shortly after dusk, when most miners would be gathering at the saloons and the Golconda's day shift would be changing. Reed kept regular evening office hours, according to Doyle, reviewing production reports and meeting with his supervisors. "Remember," Wade cautioned as they prepared to depart, "your only objective is to keep Reed distracted for 10 minutes. No matter what happens, leave after that time has elapsed. Head directly to Doc Sullivan's office. He'll provide sanctuary if needed." Eleanor nodded, adjusting the modest grey travelling dress she'd changed into, a deliberately subdued choice, to reinforce her pretense of defeat. "And you'll free Deputy Clark while Reed is occupied with me, then meet you at the doctor's office no later than 9 o'clock. Wade secured the evidence packet in a hidden compartment beneath a floorboard in the cabin. "If anything goes wrong, this location remains our fallback position." They rode toward town as sunset painted the western mountains in shades of gold and crimson. Rather than taking the main road, they approached from the north, using the terrain to remain unobserved. At the edge of town, they separated, Wade circling toward the rear of the Golconda offices, while Eleanor continued toward the main entrance. Reed's headquarters occupied a 2-story building on the eastern edge of Redemption Creek. Unlike the rough wooden structures common in mining towns, this was a substantial brick building with large windows and ornate trim, a display of wealth and permanence that emphasized Reed's position in the community. 2 armed guards flanked the main entrance, their expressions alert despite the routine nature of their duty. Eleanor approached with the slightly hesitant gait of a woman gathering her courage for an unpleasant task. "Excuse me," she addressed the guards, her voice deliberately softer than usual. "I'm Eleanor Crawford. I believe Mr. Reed might be expecting me." The guards exchanged glances. "Wait here," one instructed, disappearing inside the building. Eleanor clasped her reticule with gloved hands, projecting an image of nervous propriety while mentally counting the minutes. Wade would be approaching the rear entrance now, assuming the disguise of William Hayes. The guard returned promptly. "Mr. Reed will see you now, ma'am." She was escorted through a well-appointed lobby to a spacious office on the first floor. Stanley Reed rose from behind a massive mahogany desk as she entered, a tall man in his 40s with carefully groomed dark hair and a neatly trimmed beard. His attire was Eastern in style and quality, and he moved with the confidence of a man. "Accustomed to deference, Miss Crawford," he greeted her with a smile that didn't reach his cold blue eyes. "What an unexpected pleasure. I've been hoping for an opportunity to meet Jacob's intended bride." Eleanor offered a curtsy that would have satisfied Mrs. Whitcomb's exacting standards. "Mr. Reed, thank you for seeing me without an appointment. Please, sit." He gestured to a leather chair positioned before his desk. "I understand you've had quite an eventful introduction to Redemption Creek." She settled into the chair, arranging her skirts with deliberate care. "Indeed, nothing has proceeded as I expected since my arrival." Reed resumed his seat, studying her with calculated interest. "I was sorry to hear about Jacob's tragic accident. He was a valued colleague." The slight pause suggested anything but collegiality. "You're very kind," Eleanor murmured, eyes downcast. "It's been overwhelming, to say the least, especially given certain developments since my arrival." Reed leaned forward slightly. "Developments? Marshal Wade has been quite insistent that I pursue a claim to the Midas Touch property." She glanced up, allowing a hint of distress to show. "He seems convinced that Jacob's death was not an accident, though I can hardly credit such a terrible suggestion." "Wade has always had an overactive imagination," Reed said smoothly, "a quality that makes him less than ideal for law enforcement, in my opinion." Eleanor nodded, counting seconds in her head. 3 minutes had passed. "The marshal means well," I'm sure, but his theories have placed me in an awkward position. I came to Redemption Creek seeking marriage, not mining interests or legal complications. A perfectly reasonable perspective, Miss Crawford. Reed's tone was sympathetic, though his eyes remained calculating. What exactly brings you to my office? This evening? Practicality, Mr. Reed. She met his gaze with carefully calibrated directness. I find myself in a mining town, 2,000 miles from home, with limited funds and no immediate prospects. The Marshal suggests I pursue ownership of the Midas touch, but I have neither the experience nor the inclination for such an undertaking. Reed's expression remained neutral, but his posture shifted subtly, the predator sensing prey. What alternative? Are you considering? Return east, if possible. Eleanor allowed her voice to waver slightly. But my finances are constrained. The journey was expensive. I see. Reed steepled his fingers. And the Marshal's investigation, his theories about Jacob's death. 5 minutes had passed. Wade would be entering the building now, using the credentials and jacket they had acquired for his disguise as Hayes. Marshal Wade is very dedicated, she said carefully, but I'm afraid his conclusions are influenced by personal feelings. Jacob was his friend, after all. It's natural he would seek someone to blame for a tragic accident. Reed nodded, his expression warming fractionally. Grief often manifests as anger. The human mind rejects random tragedy, preferring to assign blame. He reached for a crystal decanter on his desk. Would you care for a drink, Miss Crawford? You seem in need of fortification. Thank you, no. 7 minutes now. Mr. Reed, to be direct, I understand you have interest in the Midas Touch property. While Marshal Wade believes I might establish a claim through my correspondence with Jacob, I have no desire to engage in prolonged legal disputes. Reed set down the decanter, his full attention now focused on Eleanor. Are you proposing some sort of arrangement, Miss Crawford? I'm exploring options, she corrected gently. If there were a way to resolve this situation that provided for my return east, while allowing Redemption Creek's mining operations to continue under experienced management. The implication hung in the air between them. Reed studied her for a long moment, reassessing his initial impression. That's a remarkably practical approach, Miss Crawford. Most women in your position would be guided by emotion rather than reason. Eleanor offered a small smile. My father valued pragmatism above all, Mr. Reed, a principle that has served me well in difficult circumstances. 9 minutes. Wade should have located Clark by now, if all had gone according to plan. I believe we could reach an arrangement beneficial to both parties, Reed said, rising from his desk. I have contacts at the Territorial Land Office who could expedite the necessary paperwork. By this time tomorrow, you could be on a stagecoach, back to civilization with sufficient funds to establish yourself comfortably. That would be ideal, Eleanor said, also standing, though I would need to retrieve my belongings from Mrs. Abernathy's boarding house. Of course. I'll have my associate, Mr. Jones, escort you. A commotion erupted somewhere in the building, shouting followed by what sounded like a scuffle. Reed moved swiftly to a cabinet behind his desk and extracted a shotgun. Stay here, he ordered, his pleasant demeanor vanishing instantly. This won't take long. As Reed strode from the office, Eleanor counted the final seconds. 10 minutes exactly. She moved immediately to the desk, quickly scanning the documents visible on its surface. Most appeared to be routine production reports, but a leather portfolio, labeled Midas Touch Integration, caught her attention. She opened it to find detailed plans for extending the Golconda tunnels to access the north shaft of Jacob's mine, precisely where the diamond discovery had been made. The plans were dated 2 weeks before the collapse, confirming Reed had known about the diamonds and had been planning to access them even before Jacob's death. Taking this evidence would immediately reveal her deception, but leaving it meant potentially losing crucial proof of premeditation. Eleanor hesitated only briefly before slipping the most damning pages into her reticule. Then, following the original plan, she moved toward the office door. The hallway outside was empty, the commotion having moved elsewhere in the building. She walked quickly toward the main entrance, maintaining the dignified pace of a lady departing a business meeting rather than the hurried steps of someone fleeing danger. The lobby was deserted, the guards who had admitted her apparently drawn to whatever disturbance Wade had created. Eleanor stepped outside into the gathering darkness, relieved to find the street relatively quiet. Most of Redemption Creek's residents were at supper or beginning their evening entertainment at the saloons that lined the main thoroughfare. She turned toward Doc Sullivan's office as planned, walking briskly but without running. Behind her, raised voices from Reed's headquarters suggested the deception had been discovered. There was no way to know if Wade had successfully freed Clark, or if both had been captured in the attempt. As she rounded the corner onto the main street, a hand suddenly grasped her arm, pulling her into the shadowed space between two buildings. She reached for her concealed derringer, only to recognize Marshal Wade's familiar form, despite the beard he'd donned as part of his disguise. "Were you successful?" she whispered. Wade nodded, gesturing behind him where Deputy Clark stood shakily, his face bruised but his expression determined. "Reed's men did a number on him, but nothing permanent. Did you find anything useful?" Eleanor extracted the papers from her reticule. Plans for accessing the diamond deposit through the Golconda tunnels, dated before the collapse. Reed knew about Jacob's discovery and was planning to steal it even before arranging his death. Wade's expression hardened as he examined the documents. In the dim light, this completes our evidence chain. Reed's motive, method, and opportunity, all documented. "Where do we go now?" Clark asked, his voice hoarse from what appeared to have been rough treatment. "Reed's men will be searching the town within minutes. Doc Sullivan's as planned," Wade decided. "We'll collect Hayes and move to the line cabin until we can arrange safe transport to Helena." As they slipped through the darkened streets of Redemption Creek, Eleanor found herself oddly calm, despite the danger. She had come to this remote mining town seeking security through marriage. Instead, she had found purpose through pursuing justice, a different kind of security, but perhaps ultimately more meaningful. And as Marshal Wade guided them through shadows with the quiet competence that had become familiar in just 2 days, she acknowledged that she had found unexpected alliance as well. Not the companionship she had anticipated with Jacob Garrett, but something forged in shared danger and mutual respect. What that might become, only time would tell. But for now, survival took precedence over speculation, a priority her practical nature heartily endorsed. Doc Sullivan's office was a haven of quiet efficiency amid the growing chaos in Redemption Creek. The doctor himself, white-haired and steady-handed despite his 60-plus years, attended to Deputy Clark's injuries, while his assistant, a young woman named Beth, prepared supplies for their journey to the line cabin. "Reed's men were questioning him about the evidence from Jacob's house," Wade explained, as Sullivan cleaned a particularly nasty cut above Clark's eye. "They seem particularly interested in anything related to the North Shaft." "Makes sense," William Hayes commented from a chair by the window where he kept watch on the street outside. The actual foreman had been recovering well from his shoulder wound and had insisted on joining their group, despite Sullivan's objections. "The diamond pipe extends primarily through that section. It's the most valuable part of the entire claim." Eleanor studied the mining foreman with interest. Hayes was younger than she had expected, perhaps 30, with intelligent brown eyes and a calm demeanor that suggested competence rather than bravado. His left arm remained in a sling, but his movements were otherwise steady and purposeful. "We have all the evidence needed now," Wade said. laying out their collected documents on Sullivan's examination table. Hayes's testimony about the boundary violations, the survey reports and diamond samples from Jacob's safe, and now Reed's own plans showing premeditation. "The question is getting it safely to Judge Wilson," Sullivan said, finishing his treatment of Clark's injuries. "Reed controls the roads, and by morning he'll have men watching every trail out of Redemption Creek." "Not every trail," Hayes interjected. "There's an old mining path through Mitchell's Pass that connects to the Helena Road. It's rough terrain, barely passable on horseback, but Reed's men wouldn't know about it. Jacob and I used it for private access to the northern claims." "How long would it take to reach Helena that way?" Wade asked. "2 days of hard riding, assuming good weather." Hayes glanced at Eleanor. "Though it's hardly suitable for a lady." Eleanor straightened her shoulders. "I've come this far, Mr. Hayes. Difficult terrain won't deter me now." A hint of respect appeared in the foreman's expression. "Jacob chose well when he wrote to you, Miss Crawford." The compliment warmed Eleanor more than she might have expected. Throughout the whirlwind events since her arrival, she had wondered what kind of man Jacob Garrett had truly been. Hearing Hayes's genuine respect, echoed in Doc Sullivan's nod of agreement, confirmed that Jacob had indeed been someone worthy. Of her journey west, "We'll leave before dawn," Wade decided, gathering the documents and returning them to the waterproof packet. "Sullivan, can you provide medical supplies? Hayes and Clark both need continued treatment." "Already prepared," the doctor confirmed, indicating a leather satchel. "Basic necessities for changing bandages and preventing infection. Enough laudanum for pain management if needed, though I'd advise using it sparingly." "What about Mrs. Abernathy?" Eleanor asked suddenly. "And the others at the boarding house? Reed might target them once he realizes we've escaped." Wade's expression darkened. "You're right, Reed isn't above using innocent civilians as leverage." "I can warn them," Beth offered, speaking for the first time. The young woman's quiet efficiency had made her nearly invisible as she worked, but her voice was firm with resolve. "No one pays much attention to a doctor's assistant. I can visit the boarding house without raising suspicion." Sullivan nodded. Approval. Beth knows how to be discreet. She can alert Mrs. Abernathy without drawing attention. With this arrangement settled, they finalized preparations for departure. Sullivan provided food and basic supplies, while Hayes sketched a rough map of the route through Mitchell's Pass. Eleanor took the opportunity to wash away the day's dust and change into more practical attire for hard riding. A split skirt she had packed for ranch life, paired with a sturdy shirtwaist and serviceable boots. "You continue to surprise me, Miss Crawford," Wade commented when she emerged from the small room where she had changed. "Most Eastern ladies wouldn't have thought to bring such practical clothing." "My father believed in thorough preparation," she replied, settling her spectacles more firmly on her nose. "And I researched Western life extensively before agreeing to Jacob's proposal. I had no intention of arriving unprepared for the realities of Montana Territory." A rare smile transformed Wade's scarred face, softening the hard lines and bringing warmth to his gray eyes. "Jacob was a fortunate man to have found you, even if fate prevented your meeting." The compliment created an unexpected flutter in Eleanor's chest, which she firmly attributed to nerves about their impending journey. This was hardly the time for such distractions, particularly with a man so different from the educated, refined Jacob Garrett she had expected to marry. Yet she couldn't deny that Marshal Daniel Wade, with his quiet strength, unwavering principles, and surprising moments of gentleness, had begun to occupy her thoughts in ways that extended beyond their current crisis. These reflections were interrupted by Hayes's urgent whisper from the window. "Reed's men are in the street, at least 6 of them going door to door. They're searching for us systematically," Wade concluded, instantly alert. "We need to move now, before they reach Sullivan's office." The doctor motioned them toward the back of the building. "There's a storage shed behind my surgery with access to the alley. Your horses are already there." They moved quickly but quietly, gathering their supplies and evidence. Sullivan provided final instructions for Clark and Hayes's wound care, while Beth slipped out the front to begin her mission to warn Mrs. Abernathy. The night had turned cool, with clouds obscuring the moon and stars, favorable conditions for their escape. Wade led the way to the shed, where 5 horses waited, saddled and provisioned. Eleanor mounted the same gentle bay mare she had ridden earlier, finding comfort in the animal's steady temperament. "We'll avoid main routes," Wade instructed in a hushed voice. "Hayes will lead, since he knows the path to Mitchell's Pass. I'll take rear position to watch for pursuit. Clark, stay close to Miss Crawford in the middle. Your primary responsibility is protecting the evidence." They moved out in single file, using the network of alleys behind Redemption Creek's businesses to avoid the main thoroughfare where Reed's men continued their search. The sound of angry voices carried through the night air as they reached the eastern edge of town. "They're at Sullivan's office," Clark murmured. "Won't take them long to realize we've fled." "All the more reason to make distance while we can," Wade replied, urging them forward. Hayes guided them northeast, away from established trails and into the rugged foothills that surrounded Redemption Creek. The terrain grew increasingly challenging as they ascended, following what appeared to be little more than a game trail in some sections. Despite the difficulty, Eleanor found herself appreciating the wild beauty of the Montana night. Clouds occasionally parted to reveal glimpses of stars scattered across the vast sky, while the scent of pine and sage filled the cool air. This was the land Jacob had described so eloquently in his letters, untamed but magnificent in its raw power. They rode steadily for nearly 3 hours before Hayes signaled a brief halt beside a small stream. The horses needed rest and water, and Hayes needed to check his wound, which had begun bleeding again during the ascent. "How far to Mitchell's Pass?" Wade asked as he helped Eleanor dismount. "Another 2 hours?" Hayes replied, grimacing slightly as Sullivan's careful bandaging was revealed to be blood-soaked. "The pass itself is narrow, barely wide enough for a loaded pack horse. Once through, we'll connect with an old trapper's trail that eventually joins the Helena Road about 15 miles northeast." Eleanor helped Clark clean and rebandage Hayes's shoulder wound, while Wade secured the horses and kept watch. The deputy's movements were still pained, but his determination remained evident. "Marshal Wade speaks highly of you," she commented. Quietly as they worked, Clark managed to smile despite his bruised face. "He's a good man to serve under, demands excellence but leads by example." He glanced toward where Wade stood sentinel on a rocky outcropping. "Never met anyone with a stronger sense of justice. How did he come by that scar?" The question had lingered in Eleanor's mind since their first meeting. "Hunting outlaws in the Dakota Territory," Clark replied. "Before he became a marshal, group of horse thieves ambushed him and left him for dead. He tracked them for 3 weeks afterward, brought all 5 in alive, despite what they'd done." The young deputy's voice held unmistakable admiration. "That's the kind of lawman he is. Tough, but fair, even when most would choose vengeance." This insight into Wade's character reinforced Eleanor's growing respect for the taciturn marshal. Jacob's letters had revealed an intelligent, thoughtful man who valued principle and fairness. Wade embodied these same qualities, though in a very different package, forged through direct experience rather than contemplative education. Their brief rest concluded, they continued the arduous journey through increasingly difficult terrain. The trail narrowed as they climbed higher, in some places requiring them to dismount and lead the horses along treacherous passages where loose shale could trigger dangerous slides. Mitchell's Pass itself proved to be exactly as Hayes had described, A narrow defile between towering rock formations, barely wide enough for their horses to navigate in single file. The passage was approximately a quarter-mile long, with sheer walls rising on either side that would make ambush nearly impossible, but would also leave them with no escape route if confronted at either end. Once through, we'll be outside Reed's usual territory, Hayes explained as they approached the entrance. His men stick to established routes where they can move quickly. They were halfway through the pass when Wade suddenly raised his hand in the signal to halt. Everyone froze, straining to hear what had alerted the marshal. "Riders," he said tersely, "coming fast from the direction of town." Hayes looked alarmed. "How? Nobody knows about this trail except Jacob's most trusted men." The implication hung heavily in the air. Someone had betrayed them. Either Reed had tortured the information from someone, or one of Jacob's trusted men had sold the information. No time to speculate now, Wade decided. We need to clear the pass before they reach the entrance. Once through, we can find defensive positions if needed. They urged their tired horses forward as quickly as safety allowed. The sounds of pursuit grew more distinct, multiple riders pushing their mounts hard up the difficult trail. Eleanor estimated at least 5, possibly more. "They're gaining," Clark warned, glancing back into the darkness of the pass. "Almost through," Hayes encouraged, as the exit came into view, approximately 50 yards ahead. They emerged from the pass into a small plateau, ringed with pine trees and boulder formations, natural cover that could provide protection in a confrontation. Wade immediately directed them toward a position where large rocks would shield them on 3 sides. "Dismount and secure the horses," he ordered, drawing his rifle from its saddle holster. "Hayes, you know this area best. Any other way out besides returning through the pass?" The foreman nodded. "There's a trail that descends to the north, but it's even more treacherous than the one we climbed, especially in darkness." Wade considered their options. "Clark, take Miss Crawford and the evidence. Hayes will guide you down that northern trail. I'll delay Reed's men here." Eleanor dismounted, but made no move to follow Clark. "That's not acceptable, Marshal. You can't face them alone." "This isn't a debate," Wade said firmly. "The evidence must reach Judge Wilson." "And it will," she countered, "but not at the cost of sacrificing you to Reed's gunmen. We stay together." Before Wade could respond, the first of their pursuers emerged from the pass, Tucker Jones leading, 3 riders, all armed with rifles. They pulled up short upon seeing Wade's group, already in defensive positions. "That's far enough, Jones," Wade called out, his rifle steady. "Turn back now and no one needs to get hurt." Jones laughed, the sound echoing unnervingly across the plateau. "Bold words from a man outnumbered, Marshal." He gestured, and 2 more riders emerged from the pass, though I expected nothing less from the famous Daniel Wade. Eleanor had positioned herself behind a boulder. Her derringer ready, though she knew its limited range made it useful only as a last resort. From her vantage point, she could see Hayes working his way around the perimeter of their position, using the darkness and scattered pine trees for cover. "Stanley Reed is finished," Wade responded, his voice carrying clear authority despite their precarious situation. "We have evidence of his involvement in Jacob Garrett's murder, the mine sabotage, and his plans to steal the diamond discovery. Judge Wilson will issue warrants within the week." "Evidence requires witnesses," Jones replied coldly. "Dead people make poor testimony." He raised his hand, preparing to signal his men to open fire. The tense standoff was broken by an unexpected sound. A rider approaching rapidly from the northern trail that Hayes had mentioned. All eyes turned as a horse and rider emerged from the darkness, silhouetted against the night sky. "That's far enough, Mr. Jones," called a familiar voice as Mrs. Abernathy of all people came into view, a shotgun resting comfortably across her saddle. "You and your boys might want to reconsider your position, Behind her appeared more riders: Edison Pierce, Peter the telegrapher, Lucille Hammond the schoolteacher, and at least a dozen miners Eleanor recognized from Redemption Creek. All were armed, their expressions grim with determination. "Jacob Garrett was good to this town," Mrs. Abernathy continued, her normally pleasant voice hard with resolve. "Treated his workers fair, helped build the school, brought a doctor when influenza. Swept through 2 winters ago. We might not wear badges, but we know justice when we see it." Jones's confident demeanor faltered as he assessed the new arrivals. What had been a 6-against-4 advantage had suddenly shifted to decidedly unfavorable odds. His men looked to him uncertainly, clearly having expected an easy ambush rather than armed resistance. "Reed won't be pleased," Jones said finally, lowering his rifle. "This isn't over, Marshal." "Yes, Mr. Jones, it is," Wade replied. "For Reed, for you, and for everyone who helped bury those 12 miners in the Midas touch collapse. There's a special kind of justice for men who murder for profit." Jones and his men retreated slowly back into the pass, unwilling to turn their backs completely until they were safely out of rifle range. Once they had disappeared, Eleanor approached Mrs. Abernathy, amazement evident in her expression. "How did you know where to find us?" The older woman smiled. "Beth brought your warning, but we were already preparing." Peter intercepted a telegraph from Reed to the territorial capital, mentioning plans to ambush you at Mitchell's Pass. Once we knew Reed's target, gathering those loyal to Jacob was simply a matter of spreading the word. Wade joined them, genuine respect in his expression, as he surveyed the impromptu militia. "I've underestimated Redemption Creek. There's more backbone here than I realized." "Jacob believed in building community, not just profits," Mrs. Abernathy said simply. "Those of us who remain haven't forgotten." She turned to Eleanor. "Now, I believe you have evidence that needs delivering to Judge Wilson." As they organized their expanded group for the continued journey to Helena, Eleanor found her gaze returning to Marshal Wade. The taciturn lawman was directing arrangements with quiet efficiency, his scarred face set in lines of determination. He looked up, catching her watching him. For a brief moment, something unspoken passed between them. Acknowledgement of shared danger overcome, mutual respect earned, and perhaps something more that neither was yet ready to name. Eleanor smiled slightly before turning away. She had come to Montana Territory seeking one future and found another entirely. What that future might hold remained uncertain, but for the first time since arriving in Redemption Creek, she felt something that had been missing even in her correspondence. With Jacob Garrett, a sense of belonging not to a person, but to a cause and a community worth fighting for. The territorial courthouse in Helena stood as a testament to Montana's growing importance, a substantial structure of granite and timber that housed the judicial authority for the sprawling territory. 2 days of hard travel had brought Eleanor and their expanded party to the territorial capital, their arrival timed perfectly with Judge Wilson's court session. Eleanor smoothed her travel-worn skirt as they climbed the courthouse steps, acutely aware of the contrast between their dust-covered group and the well-dressed lawyers and officials moving through the imposing building. Marshal Wade walked beside her, his presence steady and reassuring despite his own trail-worn appearance. "Judge Wilson has a reputation for fairness," he said quietly. "He's one of the few territorial officials not in Reed's sphere of influence." The judge proved to be an imposing figure, silver-haired and keen-eyed, with the weathered face of a man who had spent decades sorting truth from falsehood. He received their party in his private chambers, listening without interruption as Wade presented their evidence. The boundary survey proving Reed's illegal mining, Jacob's documentation of the diamond discovery, Reed's own plans showing premeditation, and the sworn testimonies of Hayes, Clark, and Eleanor regarding the events since her arrival. When the presentation concluded, Judge Wilson removed his spectacles and rubbed the bridge of his nose. This is the most thoroughly documented case of claim jumping and murder I've encountered. In 15 years on the bench, Marshal Wade, you've done exceptional work gathering this evidence. Miss Crawford deserves equal credit, Wade replied, his expression remaining professional despite the praise. Her persistence and courage were instrumental in securing key documents. The judge turned his attention to Eleanor. You arrived in Redemption Creek expecting to be a bride, Miss Crawford. Instead, you found yourself in the middle of a dangerous conspiracy. Most women would have sought the first stagecoach east. I considered that option, Your Honor, she acknowledged, but I couldn't abandon the pursuit of justice for Jacob Garrett. He deserved better than to have his murderer profit from his death. Judge Wilson nodded thoughtfully. Admirable principles. He returned to the documents, reviewing the diamond assay reports with particular interest. This discovery changes everything for Montana Territory. Properly developed, these deposits could rival the Kimberley Fields in South Africa. Jacob intended to register the discovery officially, Eleanor explained. He wanted proper oversight to ensure the wealth benefited the territory, not just a few investors. A forward-thinking man, the judge commented. And what are your intentions regarding the Midas touch claim, Miss Crawford? As Mr. Garrett's documented intended, you have legitimate standing to petition for ownership. Eleanor had considered this question extensively during their journey to Helena. The mine itself remains partially collapsed and would require substantial investment to restore operations. The diamond deposit, however, should be developed under territorial oversight, as Jacob intended. She placed a document on the judge's desk, a proposal she had drafted during their night at a way station outside Helena. I'm proposing the formation of the Garrett Mining Trust. 50% of proceeds would fund infrastructure improvements in Redemption Creek and educational opportunities for miners' families. 20% would establish a safety fund for injured miners and widows. The remaining 30% would provide reasonable returns for necessary investors. Marshal Wade looked at her with undisguised admiration, having not been privy to this plan before. Judge Wilson studied the proposal, nodding slowly as he read. Ambitious and remarkably detailed, he commented. But who would oversee such an operation? Diamond mining requires specialized knowledge. William Hayes has that knowledge, Eleanor replied. As Jacob's foreman, he's familiar with both the gold operations and the diamond discovery. With proper backing and territorial oversight, he could manage the reconstruction and development. The judge considered this, and your role, Miss Crawford. Eleanor straightened her shoulders. I would serve as administrator of the trust, ensuring the proceeds are distributed according to Jacob's vision. My experience as a teacher and my father's assistant in managing college accounts has prepared me for such responsibilities. Judge Wilson set down the proposal and leaned back in his chair. I'll need time to review everything thoroughly, but I'm prepared to issue immediate arrest warrants for Stanley Reed and his associates based on the evidence presented. Marshal Wade, I assume you're willing to execute these warrants? With Deputy Clark and a territorial posse, Wade confirmed, Reed will have learned of our arrival in Helena by now. He may attempt to flee or destroy additional evidence. The following hours were a flurry of activity. Judge Wilson issued the warrants and authorized a substantial posse to accompany Wade back to Redemption Creek. Telegrams were dispatched to federal authorities regarding the diamond discovery, and Eleanor's proposal was formally entered into territorial records pending full review. By late afternoon, preparations for Wade's return journey were complete. The marshal would depart at dawn, with Deputy Clark, Hayes, and 20 territorial officers, intending to reach Redemption Creek before Reed could organize his escape. Eleanor found Wade checking his equipment in the stable behind the courthouse, his movements methodical as he prepared for the potential confrontation ahead. I've been assigned quarters at the Helena Hotel, she said, approaching quietly. Judge Wilson believes I should remain here until Reed is in custody. Wade nodded, without looking up from his saddle. A wise precaution. Reed is most dangerous now that he's cornered. When will you return to Helena? 3 days, if all goes smoothly. Perhaps longer if Reed resists arrest. He finally turned to face her, his grey eyes serious beneath the brim of his hat. Your trust proposal was impressive, Eleanor. Jacob would have approved. The use of her given name wasn't lost on her. Throughout their dangerous journey, Wade had maintained a careful formality, addressing her as Miss Crawford, despite their shared perils. This subtle shift felt significant, though neither acknowledged it directly. I hope to honor his vision, she replied, though the path has proven quite different than expected. A ghost of a smile touched Wade's scarred face. Expectations rarely survive contact with Montana territory. This land has a way of revealing what people are truly made of. And what has it revealed about me, Marshal? The question emerged before she could reconsider its implications. His expression softened. Courage, determination, a practical mind, paired with principled heart. He paused, something unspoken in his gaze. Rare qualities in any person, man or woman. Eleanor felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun filtering through the stable windows. You'll be careful when confronting Reed? Always. He secured the final buckle on his saddle. I have additional motivation to return safely. Now. The implication hung in the air between them, neither quite ready to articulate feelings that had developed amid danger and shared purpose. There would be time for such conversations after justice was secured. I should let you finish your preparations, Eleanor said, conscious of the busy stable around them. Good luck, Marshal Wade. Daniel, he corrected quietly. After everything we've faced together, I believe we've earned first-name basis. Daniel, she repeated with a small smile. Godspeed. 3 days later, Eleanor stood on the platform of the Helena Telegraph Office, waiting anxiously for news from Redemption Creek. Judge Wilson had been true to his word, expediting review of her proposal while territorial officials began preliminary assessments of the diamond discovery's extent. The telegraph operator's door opened, and he emerged with a yellow paper in hand. Message for Miss Crawford, he called. Eleanor accepted the telegram with steady hands that belied her inattention. The brief message caused her shoulders to relax for the first time in days. Reed in custody. Stop all deputies. Safe stop returning tomorrow with prisoners. Stop redemption. Creek sends regards. Stop Danielone. Month later, Eleanor stood at the partially reconstructed entrance to the Midas touch mine, watching as workers cleared the last debris from the main shaft. The Territorial Mining Commissioner beside her made notes as Hayes explained the engineering improvements being implemented to prevent future collapses. The diamond pipe appears intact, Hayes concluded. Preliminary assays confirm Jacob's original findings. Once fully operational, this could be the most significant mineral discovery in Montana's history. And the safety improvements? Eleanor asked, her focus remaining on the miners rather than the profits they would generate. Everything to current specifications, the Commissioner confirmed, plus the additional supports you insisted upon. This will be the most secure mining operation in the territory. Satisfied, Eleanor signed the inspection documents. The Garrett Mining Trust was officially operational, with territorial backing and federal oversight ensuring both safety and fair distribution of proceeds. Already, Redemption Creek was showing signs of rebirth, buildings being repaired, new businesses opening, and families returning as legitimate employment opportunities expanded. She walked back toward town, nodding greetings to workers and residents, who had come to respect the Diamond Lady, as some had taken to calling her. The journey from mail-order bride to mine administrator had been unexpected, but Eleanor found fulfillment in honoring Jacob's vision while charting her own path. The renovated office of the Midas Touch Mine, now headquarters of the Garrett Trust, occupied the building where Jacob had once worked. Eleanor had maintained his organizational systems while adding her own touch, a school fund ledger, a widow's relief account, and plans for a proper library for Redemption Creek. She was reviewing applications for the new safety inspector position when a familiar figure appeared in the doorway. Marshal Wade, recently returned from delivering Reed and his associates to federal authorities in Denver. "The office suits you," he remarked, removing his hat as he entered. Eleanor smiled. In the weeks since Reed's arrest, Wade had made frequent trips between Redemption Creek and his official duties in Helena. Each visit had brought them closer, conversations extending beyond the case to personal histories, aspirations, and gradually toward something more meaningful. "How was Denver?" she asked, setting aside her work. "Reed and Jones will stand trial next month. Federal prosecutors are confident of convictions given our evidence." He settled into the chair across from her desk. "I've been offered a position with the federal marshals there." Eleanor felt a momentary pang at the thought of his departure. "That's a significant promotion. Congratulations." "I haven't accepted yet." His gray eyes held hers steadily. "There are considerations keeping me in Montana." "The pursuit of justice?" she suggested, though she understood his meaning perfectly well. A rare, full smile transformed his face. "That's certainly part of it. But there's also the matter of a certain mining trust administrator who's become rather important to me." Eleanor set down her pen. "Is that so, Marshal Wade?" "Daniel," he corrected, reaching across the desk to take her hand. "And yes, Eleanor, that is very much so." She looked at their joined hands, her slender fingers against his calloused palm, so different yet somehow fitting together perfectly. "I came to Redemption Creek seeking one future and found another entirely. A better one, I hope." The question carried more vulnerability than she had ever heard in his voice. Eleanor smiled, thinking of all they had endured together and all that lay ahead. Not the genteel marriage she had imagined with Jacob, but a partnership forged through shared danger and mutual respect with a man whose quiet strength complemented her practical determination. "Different but right," she answered truthfully. "Sometimes life buries the future we expect, only to reveal something more valuable underneath." Daniel nodded, understanding the diamond mining metaphor perfectly. "Like finding a rough stone where you expected only gold." "Exactly." Eleanor rose and moved around the desk, still holding his hand. "Sometimes the most precious discoveries are the ones we never thought to seek." As the afternoon sun slanted through the windows of what had once been Jacob Garrett's office, Eleanor Crawford found herself exactly where she belonged, not as the bride she had journeyed to become, but as a woman who had discovered her own strength while building something lasting from tragedy. And beside her stood not the husband she had expected, but the partner she had found amid danger and courage. Redemption Creek had indeed offered her redemption, though not in the way anyone could have predicted. And as Daniel Wade drew her closer, Eleanor silently thanked Jacob Garrett for bringing her west, where she had found not just one man's dream, but her own destiny. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.